Now, as many of you know, Korean Americans are the second largest Asian group in Orange County. And Orange County has the second largest Korean immigrant population in the whole United States. So what we have is this campus and this community that has a really high interest in Korean literature and culture. And to that end, last year, the Consulate General of the Republic of Korea in Los Angeles, delegated by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, designated support to create a Korea Corner in the libraries. Now, at the time it was first dedicated, we didn't really have it set up. And now, as you can see, there's space for seating, books, and DVDs in Korean and English languages, and we encourage you to visit the Korea Corner. After this program, it's located one floor below us on the first floor. We also hope that you picked up a flyer that was at the information desk that looks like this, and this outlines the Korea Corner, the goal to enhance our library collections, and the Korean American Women's Archive Project, which is a new initiative to record the oral histories of 50 Korean American women in Southern California. It's a very exciting new initiative. Now, the important campus and community interest in Korean culture and literature is why we are so excited to have Park Min-gyu here today. So here to provide some remarks and to introduce the author, please welcome Dr. Chung-hyun Kim.
Thank you, Lorelei, for, again, a wonderful introduction. And I owe so much to her. This is the second, actually, event that we're holding here at UCI's wonderful Holden Reading Room, the Langston Library. And we've only been in existence, basically 3 hours, right? The Center for Critical Korean Studies. So as you can tell, that she's been really supportive. Shala, her staff, has been wonderful to us. And I also thank, before I forget, Elena Kim over at the Center for Asian Studies, as well as CCKS for helping us sponsor this wonderful event with Park Min-gyu, as well as some of the staff member, Agnel, Joseph, from the LTI Literary Translation Institute in Korea, who's helped accompany Park Min-gyu today. Now, this is a sort of a dream come true for me because over the last 15 years, I've been dying to meet Park Min-gyu and hadn't really been successful. He's a notorious recluse. We've been emailing each other quite a bit, and I finally did get to meet him last year. But meeting him is one thing. To actually get invited, to get him to accept an invitation to be part of this kind of a literary forum is another, right? And he has been notoriously difficult to get, right? And when I actually broached the idea a number of times to LTI to sponsor Park Min-gyu, they said, no, he doesn't do these things very often. And as Professor Bruce Fulton probably might acknowledge himself as well, he is definitely difficult to get. So thank you again, Min-gyu, for coming, finally, showing up and breaking that spell that we had on you. Now, I've been a big fan of Park Min-gyu's work ever since his first novel came out in 2003. Its title was quite strange. Never did I actually encounter perhaps the strangest title in Korean literary history when it first came out. And I saw it in the bookstore and I said, you gotta be kidding me, what is this? And I didn't think it was actually a novel with a literary value when I actually saw it in the, in a corner of a Korean bookstore. This was 2003, because it really did have a strange title. In Korean, it's Sanmi Superstars의 마지막 팬클럽. Right? Last Fan Club of Sanmi Superstars was the title of the name that really had, slowly getting its momentum, not as famous as some of the this loud literary debut that was around probably for other authors, but slowly getting its reputation, right? And I read it, and I just fell in love with his work. And I've been telling everybody since then how great his work has been. And to a certain extent, I have to say I was right. My hinge on him being a great literary talent, when I first saw this book and started writing about it as well in different kinds of medium, I just been so proud to be associated with his ascendance, if you will. I think there were a couple of reasons why I thought he was great. First of all, I think, although I always thought it was great that there were so many women writers in Korea, 1980s and 1990s Korean literary scene was really dominated by women writers. Shin Kyung-suk, some of them are still very famous and popular. Shin Kyung-suk, Kong Ji-young, Professor Chung Mu-choi's sister Choi Yun, and so forth. They were dominating, the Korean literary scene, and male authors had, by and large, of my generation, had been, kind of spun off. And as you can tell from the title of the novel, it is about baseball. Sami Superstars was a real professional baseball team that actually came out first playing in 1982 when the KBO was inaugurated in Korea. And then, it actually, after losing year after year, and losing big time, right? So their record would be not even decent, like halfway decent. It would be like they had a record of 5-47. They would just continuously lose, and they were awful as, I don't know, San Diego Padres. And knock on San Diego, I suppose. But it really spoke again, not only to a new sensibility that was coming out, but a new, perhaps, maybe, I don't know, in some ways like a gender paradigm that was, maybe shifting. His novels were, as you can imagine, it had this kind of a postmodern grab, post-human grab, and I talk about postmodernism in a minute as well, but post-human grab. Meaning, yeah, it's about baseball, but it's not necessarily about, your intimate relationship with real baseball players who are, of course, humans, but it's the ways in which they're actually simulacrated, if you will. They're the way in which they're represented on television, the way in which, a figure of baseball players is enmeshed in this kind of weird, emblematic kind of mascot called superstars, and there would be many ways, iconic, but also anti-iconic as well. And that was kind of an engagement, this grotesque kind of, almost grotesque engagement, because they were, superstars, or they were so-called superstars, but they had a record of, as I said, 5-57. They kept losing, right? So it's a different kind of engagement, if you will. The ways in which we think about humans, it was pushing towards another boundary because there were no longer just human baseball players that you were actually identifying with, but they're in many ways screen personas, right, and icons and simulations of baseball. And baseball is a child's game anyway, that you were now identifying with, and the memories of that providing a rubric of how you actually recollect a period of a really difficult time in Korea. That's 1980s, right? A period that was dark, that was depressing, and very much marked by political oppression, and yet you had basically a new kind of a recognition and memory that rose beyond, right, that political kind of flavor. So that probably is the reason why I had a strong, his novel, not just Sami Superstars, but others, had a strong resonance and impact on my professional life as well as my real life. And I just wanted to read, because my colleague, Youngju Liu, who actually teaches Korean literature in Michigan, has just published a book. And although the book is about 1970s, and she deals with writers who are from that period, Kim Ji-ha, Lee Min-gu, Hwang Se-kyung, and so on, she does devote a lot of time talking about Bang Min-gyu, especially in the end chapter, and I wanted to read a passage from it. Bang Min-gyu's fiction from the 2000s, this is Youngju, explores the advanced capitalist city's crevices into which all the irregulars, part-timers, interns, forced early retirees, the homeless, and the unemployed in the permanent process of preparing for employment have disappeared, what is called the 취업 준비. She forgets losing baseball players in that mix for some reason, but they're also part of the irregulars as well. Within these invisible crevices, they toil to maintain, simply because they must, the giant socio-economic juggernaut rolling forward, without a hope of ever making it out from under its crushing wheels. I love and respect Youngju, and this is a great passage, but I slightly disagree with Youngju at this point because she says no hope, crushed under the spinning wheels of late capitalism. Yes, there is some truth to that, but I feel they also, Bang Min-gyu's stories and novels have a way of overwhelming that. There's always a glimpse, however little and just a glimpse it may be, there is usually hope and optimism left reserved, even as we remember the dark times of 1980s or and beyond in South Korea. So without further ado, here's Bang Min-gyu. Today, we'll be reading from his real fascinating story, 갑을 고시원 체류기, which we couldn't really translate very well. And we only call it, as you picked up a copy of just the handout, it's called a Journal from Alpha Mega 고시원. Okay, so here it is.
네, 반갑습니다. Nice to meet you. 낭독하겠습니다.
I will read, and after he's done with a passage from the short story, Maddie Collins, who's who's majoring in Korean, she'll come on stage and she'll be doing the English translation immediately after this.
첫날 밤 내 방문을 두드린 사람은 김 검사였다. 컴퓨터가 문제였는데 모니터를 놓으면 의자를 올릴 수 없고, 즉 누울 수 없다는 결론이 나왔던 것이다. 그러나 선택의 여지가 없는 공간이어서 금세 해답을 찾을 수 있었다. 나는 다리를 펴지 않기로 했다. 결심을 하고 보니 과연 새우잠이 건강에도 좋다는 얘기를 어디선가 들은 듯도 했다. 그럴 수도 있겠지. 스스로를 위로하고 보니 어느새 밤이었다. 그 첫날 밤은 아직도 생생하다. 예수가 다시 태어나도 좋을 만큼 고요한 밤이었고, 너무나 검소하고 청빈해서 거룩한 밤이었다. 잠이 오지 않은 나는 조용히 가방을 뒤졌고, 세 번째 가방의 옆구리에서 워크맨을 찾아냈다. 그런데 이어폰이 보이지 않았다. 결국 숨을 죽이며 주파수를 맞춘 다음 들릴락 말락 최소의 볼륨으로 음악을 듣기 시작했다. 그러니까 얼마나 최소의 볼륨이었냐 하면 가사는 전혀 알아들을 수 없고 그저 음악이 나오는구나 정도를 알 수 있는 쟁쟁쟁쟁의 연속이었다. 이상하게도 그 쟁쟁쟁쟁을 듣고 있으니 왈칵 눈물이 났다. 제목을 알 수 없는 그 쟁쟁쟁쟁은 그 정도의 명곡이었던 것이다. 똑똑. 노크 소리가 나기 직전에 옆방의 문이 열리는 소리를 들었으므로 나는 노크의 주인공이 옆방 사람이란 걸 쉽게 알 수 있었다. 인사라도 하고 지낼까라는 생각으로 문을 열자 인사를 도저히 할 수 없는 환한 얼굴이 문 밖에 서 있었다. 남자로선 작은 키에 땅따란 체구, 나보다 10살 정도는 많아 보이는 짧은 머리의 남자가 두 손을 허리춤에 얹은 채 나를 노려보고 있었다. 금태안경 속의 작은 눈은 충혈되어 있었다. 조용히 해. 단 한마디만을 내뱉은 후 남자는 자신의 방으로 들어갔다. 나는 조용히 문을 닫은 후 뭔가 큰 잘못을 저질렀다는 생각에 불을 끄고 몸을 웅크린 후 잠을 잤다. 물론 잠이 올 리 없었지만 잠을 자야 한다고 열심히 생각했다. 나는 노력했다. 다음 날 아침에는 주인 아줌마가 나를 보자고 했다. 아줌마는 어젯밤의 일을 소상히 알고 있었고 이런저런 충고에 이런저런 협조를 아울러 부탁했다. 요컨대 문제의 옆방 남자는 이 고시원 최후의 진짜 고시생이었으며 그런 이유로 실내 정숙에 각별한 신경을 써달라는 얘기였다. 아줌마는 그를 김검사라고 불렀다. 조심하겠습니다. 뭔가 할 말이 있다는 기분도 들었지만 대체로 나는 내가 처하게 된 이 특수한 상황을 현실로서 받아들이기로 마음먹었다. 달리 수가 없기도 했거니와 뭐랄까 대체로 그런 성격이었다. 넌 아버지를 빼닮았다. 어머님들 그런 말씀을 하시곤 했다. 그날 이후 1cm 두께의 베닐판을 사이에 둔 나와 김 검사의 동거가 시작되었다. 정말이지 동거가 아닐 수 없다고 나는 생각했다. 내 쪽에서도 책상을 구르는 볼펜의 소리라든지 또 훌쩍 코를 들이켜는 소리 같은 것을 너무나도 생생히 들을 수 있었기 때문이다. 때문에 가끔 미치도록 쟁쟁쟁쟁이 그리울 때도 있었지만 무섭게 충혈된 작은 눈을 떠올리며 꿀꺽 침을 삼키고는 했다. 나는 점점 조용한 인간이 되어갔다. 주의를 기울여 보면 인간의 몸에선 참으로 여러 가지의 소리가 난다. 한마디로 인간은 꽤나 시끄러운 동물이다. 김 검사의 성격은 그야말로 예민한 편이어서 나의 몸이 아주 작은 소리를 내기만 해도 불쾌한 기색을 여지없이 드러내고는 했다. 예를 들어 끙이라든가 아니면 벽을 딱 하고 때린다거나 그럴 때마다 나는 깜짝 이 또한 여지없이 접촉이 나쁜 형광등처럼 불안한 파상으로 몸을 떨고는 했다. 결국 나는 소리가 나지 않는 인간이 되었다. 어느 순간인가 저절로 그런 능력이 몸에 배게 된 것이다. 발꿈치를 들고 걷는 게 생활화되었고 코를 푸는 게 아니라 눌러서 조용히 짜는 습관이 생겼으며 가스를 배출할 땐 옆으로 돌아 누운 다음 손으로 둔부의 한쪽을 힘껏 잡아당겨 거의 소리를 내지 않는 기술을 터득하게 되었다. 피쉬. 온순한 한 마리의 열대와 같은 가스를 아무도 없는 좁은 방 안에서 엉덩이 한쪽을 최대한 잡아당긴 채 조심조심 방류하다 보면 나는 늘 가족들이 보고 싶거나 아니면 머릿속에 그리운 금강산 같은 노래를 조용히 떠올리곤 했다. 이유는 알 수 없다. 하여간에 그리운 금강산이다. 그 한 달이 가장 힘들고 외로웠던 시기였다. 계절이 봄이란 이유로 히터를 전혀 가동하지 않았으므로 실제 방 안의 체감 온도는 몹시도 추운 편이었다. 그리고 나는 늘 혼자였다. 외롭고 정숙하고 정숙해야만 하는 방 안에서 나는 웅크리고 견디고 참고 침묵했고, 그러던 어느 날 인간은 결국 혼자라는 사실과 이 세상은 혼자만 사는 게 아니라는 사실을 동시에 뼈저리게 느끼게 되었다. 모순 같은 말이지만 지금도 나는 그렇게 믿고 있다. 즉, 어쩌면 인간은 혼자서 세상을 사는 게 아니기 때문에 혼자인 게 아닐까. 아무튼 말이다.
Hello, my name is Maddie Collins. I'm a third-year undergraduate majoring in Korean literature and culture. I was very thankful for the opportunity to participate in the translation workshop this past quarter. And I just want to take a moment to recognize all the other students that worked together to translate this great work. Besides myself, there was Vanessa Baker, Soo-Hun Kim, Tien Lee, Anat Schwartz, and In Young Song, and of course, want to thank our wonderful professor, Kyung-Hyun Kim, for all the hard work. I will be reading from the bottom of page number 5, where it says, "On the first night," and I will end at page number 7, where it says, "Anyway, that's the truth," if you'd like to follow along with me. On the first night, the person who knocked on my door was none other than District Attorney Kim. My computer was a problem. I had come to the conclusion that if the monitor was placed on the desk, then there would be no place left for the chair. In other words, there was no space for me to lie down. Since the space left me with little choice, I was immediately able to find a solution. I decided not to stretch out my legs. I'm sure I have heard somewhere that sleeping all curled up like a shrimp is actually good for your health. I know, hey, it's possible. Night fell as I comforted myself. The first night is still vivid in my memory. It was enough of a silent night for baby Jesus to be born again, and also enough of a holy night for one to feel the humility and the poverty. I could not sleep. I quietly searched my bags, and in the third bag's side pocket found a Walkman. However, I could not find my earphones. Holding my breath, I tuned into a station and listened to the music at the lowest volume that could barely reach me. To elaborate a little further, the extent of the lowest volume was so low that I could not understand the lyrics at all, but could only hear the continuous sound of clang, 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 that barely indicated that music was playing. It was weird, but I broke into tears while listening to that clang clang sound. The clang clang was not a song that I knew, but it was still a great masterpiece. Knock knock. I knew the knock came from the person in the next room because I could hear its door open right before the sound of the knock. I opened the door thinking that it wouldn't hurt to be on greeting terms, but beyond the door stood nothing but an angry face that made such a greeting impossible. A short-haired man, who was unusually short, had a squat build, and looked to be about 10 years older than me, glared at me with both hands firmly resting on his hips. His squinty eyes behind his metal-framed glasses were bloodshot. "Be quiet." After spitting out those 2 words, the man walked back to his room. After quietly closing the door, I turned off the light, curled up, and slept, thinking that I had made a huge mistake. Of course, there was no way sleep would come, but I thought hard that I would have to sleep. I did my best. Next day's morning, the proprietor asked me to see her. She knew all too well about what had happened the night before, and then offered me advice of one kind or another, along with requests for cooperation with one thing or another. In short, the man in the next room was the last real bar examinee left in the Koshiwon. For that reason, we needed to pay particular attention to the rule of courtesy at all times. The proprietor called the man District Attorney Kim. "I'll be careful." I was feeling that I should speak up, but I decided that I would have to accept this special circumstance of mine as not anything special, but as the norm. I had no other option, but I realized that I had that kind of passive personality. "You are exactly like your dad. Mom used to say that all the time. After that day, with that 1 centimeter plywood divider separating me and D.A. Kim, we became roommates. I mean, there is no other way to describe our relationship than to call him my roommate. The sound of a pen rolling on the desk or the sniffing of his nose could be vividly heard even from my side. Therefore, sometimes I went mad about the need to listen to the clang, 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 but I would just gulp down the saliva formed in my mouth, reminding myself of those scary, squinty pair of bloodshot eyes. Bit by bit, I became more silent. If you actually pay attention, the human body produces all kinds of noises. In other words, humans are quite noisy animals. Because D.A. Kim's personality was so sensitive, if my body were to produce even a very small sound, he did not hesitate to express his annoyance. For instance, a small groan or a slap on the wall would make me jolt, causing a tremor through my body like a bad fluorescent light that flickers on and off. So, I eventually became a creature that produces no sound. At some point, my body had naturally acquired that kind of ability. I had grown accustomed to walking on a tiptoe, to squeezing my snot out of my nose rather than blowing my nose, to clenching one side of my glutes to silently let out gas while lying on my side. All of this to master the art of silence. Psst. Trapped in a small room alone, whenever I freed the fart as if it was a domesticated tropical fish with one side of my glute hoisted up as tightly as it would go, I thought about how much I really missed my family. I also thought in my head of the words to the song, Diamond Head Mountain That I Long to See. I had no idea why. Anyway, it was Diamond Head Mountain that I long to see. Whether north or south, the mountains so beautiful and pure, those 12,000 peaks I long to see. Though worldless, at last freed from the north, we stand together in unison. Our Diamond Head Mountain, that name I long to call again, that mountain eternally beautiful, tainted by the commies for several years, but now we seek to reclaim. That Diamond Head Mountain calls out to us. That 1 month was my most difficult and the most lonesome period. Because it was spring, the heater was never turned on, so the actual room temperature was quite frigid. I was always alone. In that narrow, lonely, always courteous, and courtesy at all times room, I crouched, tolerated, persisted, and remained silent. And then one day, I broke down and realized that I was all alone in the world, but at the same time, could not live in the world alone. I still believe in this, though it may be full of contradictions. Therefore, perhaps humans are alone precisely because they cannot live in the world alone. Anyway, that's the truth.
Thank you. And next, we actually have a special guest who's here today with us. Bruce Fulton and Juchan Fulton. And I've known Bruce probably over the last 15 years, on and off. You know, I must have seen you 20 times, 25 times. He's been here, Irvine, part of translation seminars or, introducing an author, different conference. But I've never had the delightful occasion to meet Juchan. And now I see why. She's so darn beautiful. He's eminent, again, for those of you who are familiar with Korean literature, he's probably the most preeminent translator of Korean literature. I am actually part of a class this quarter, Transnational Korean Lit and Film, and I realized when I had the prospect of actually introducing some of my students, the possibility of Bruce and Juchan coming, I realized there and then, only then, that he had already translated 3 of the stories that we read. So without further ado, here is Bruce. And Juchan?
Thank you very much, Kyung. And I should mention that whenever Kyung mentions me alone in terms of literary translation, he's actually mentioning both of us. We're a team. In Korean, there's a word for what we're doing here today, and that term is bul chung-gek. We're an uninvited guest, and I will confess the entire story. So this is our latest book, which you'll be seeing afterwards. It's a collection of works in a variety of genres by Chae Man-sik, one of the great voices of 20th century Korean literature. The book just came out, and we were honored. Usually on the backs of these books, there's one or two blurbs, as they're referred to in the industry. We have 4 on this, and guess what? 3 of them are from scholars in Southern California, UCLA, UC Irvine, and UC San Diego. So it turned out that I am going to be representing the University of British Columbia Center for Korean Research at an annual worldwide consortium of Korean Studies Centers conference at UCLA. And I got this idea, well, why not see if we can also work in some publicity for our author, Chae Man-sik, and Kyung was kind enough to dovetail us into this event. But as Kyung mentioned, it's long been my desire as well to have Pang Ming-gyu join us in the U.S. This is his first time here. I did try a couple of times. Mr. Pak responded that he felt that he didn't have much available in English translation. I think that is going to change in the next decade or two. Ju Chan tells me she's done a little bit of research on the internet and discovered that in a recent poll, Mr. Pak has been chosen by a group of literary critics in Korea to be the most accomplished Korean fiction writer of the new millennium. So customarily, in his customarily humble way, he's denying any such reports. So we're doubly delighted to be here today. And I like to tell anecdotes, but the part of the story that you just heard about the protagonist being unable to sleep at night reminds me of a story about Chae Man-sik. The title story of this volume is called Sunset. It's Nakcho in Korean. It was written he finished in August 1948, almost exactly to the day that the Republic of Korea was established. The title is obviously ironic, the setting sun being the emblem of Japan by 1948, 3 years having vacated the Korean Peninsula, but still very much present in the psyches of Koreans. By that time, 1948, Chae Man-sik had 3 years left to live. He was afflicted with tuberculosis. And in 1948, he was living in his home province of North Cholla, but he was living in the city of Iri with his brother, who had a very tiny room that, so the story goes, allowed Chae Man-sik just enough room to fit his folded legs under a small writing table. And this is where he wrote the novella that's the title story of this anthology. Ju Chan,
15 minutes.
oh, 15 minutes, okay.
I will say quick thank you, and thank you for this opportunity. And it's been a great pleasure to work on this book. And as you know, I am doing most of Nejo. And mostly we are usually 2 for 1, so that's why Bruce always shows his pretty face. Thank you.
we fortunate to have a clock staring us right in the face, so we will be faithful to the time. I should mention that one of the characteristics of Pa Mingyu that I see also in Che Manchik is delightful use of language. Che Manchik is an author I always think of as having a very distinctive writing style. I think of him as an in-your-face kind of author, very direct. For those of you who know anything about the oral tradition, Korea's very rich oral tradition, you might recall that the traditional oral narrative called pansori, literally voices in an open space, originated in Che Manchik's home province, and I think Che Manchik, more than any modern Korean fiction writer, has appropriated not only the very direct style, but some of the rhetorical devices of pansori, the use of lists, litanies, rhetorical questions. His dialogue is very spicy, and I see some of those same qualities in Pa Mingyu's stories as well. The first story of Pa Mingyu that I became familiar with was his Nogari story, the story about a raccoon, which combines very incisive kind of social commentary, workplace life, with a homoerotic undertone, something that is still somewhat unusual in literary fiction in Korea. And then in 2011, when I was on sabbatical in Seoul, I had the great pleasure of being asked to adjudicate the annual Korean Literature Translation Institute competition for aspiring translators. And the story that was being translated that year was Mr. Pak's 2010 Isong Literature Prize winning story, Achime Mun. And in that story, Mr. Pak combined had a kind of a dual focus on a suicide club, of which there was one survivor, a group suicide that, at least for the narrator, went wrong. He survived. But he happened to spy a woman in an adjoining apartment, a pregnant, unwed mother who, in a period of despair, decided to hang herself. And we see a kind of a rapprochement there. Very powerful story, as yet untranslated, but I believe that it's only a matter of time before Mr. Pak finds himself increasingly in English translation. So just a few words about Che Manchik. Ju Chan and I really became interested in his work in the 1990s when a friend of ours whom I had gone to school with at the University of Washington in the early 1980s, Paul Lascelles, was making his way through Che Manchik's 10-volume complete works. And I remember a story he told me. He was at one of the swimming pools at the University of Washington, and there was a swimmer there named James Palais. James Palais was a student of Edward Wagner at Harvard, and James Palais trained most of the current generation of Korean history scholars. So James Palais, Paul Lascelles was working as a monitor of the pool. James Lascelles comes out and sees Paul Lascelles reading Che Manchik. He says, "Who are you? Reading Korean. I should know who you are." So we've been interested in Che Manchik for over 20 years. Over the years, we've translated 3 or 4 of his stories. And then it occurred to us he remains underrepresented in English translation, even though one of his signature stories, Chisuk, which Ju Chan and I translated as My Innocent Uncle, and we owe Paul Lascelles the title for that. Actually, he suggested it should really be My Shit for Brains Uncle. Pardon me for the vulgarity, but that would have been a very Che Manchik style title, I think. But we, even though one of his novels and several of his stories have been translated, we felt that the sheer importance of his body of work had not been justice in English translation. And so what we thought we would do, and here I recall back when I was an undergraduate at a small liberal arts college in the 1960s, one of the series that I feasted on were the Viking portable editions. The Viking Henry James, the Viking Nathaniel Hawthorne. And these were collections of stories, excerpts from novels, letters, essays. You really got a good introduction. You really got a good feel for the writer. Nothing like this in English for Korean writers, and so we thought that that's what we would do. So the subtitle of this book is A Chaemanchik Reader, a dokbon, and we tried to incorporate as many different genres as we could. So we've got a novella. The title story is a novella. We've got some standard short stories, tanpyeon soso. We've got even shorter works, which in Korean are known as kongta. It's a French word. The genre in Korea is a little bit different from the conte in France. We have travel essays. We have anecdotal essays. We have a children's story. We have a couple of roundtable discussions which shed light on what it was like for writers. The second of them takes place during the so-called dark years, the Amhakgi, and we also included one of his so-called Chinil stories, friendly to Japan stories. This is another issue we're taking up in this book. So I am going to finish by reading a very, very short piece. It's an essay that Chaemanchik wrote upon the passing of the writer Kim Yu-jung. Kim Yu-jung is another very distinctive voice from the colonial period. Like so many of his contemporaries, he died young. I don't believe he was 30 yet when he died. And Chaemanchik, I think, met him only once or twice. But in his inimitable style, he just dashed off the short piece for the magazine Chogwang, Morning Light, in May of 1937. It's a very short piece. It's in Korean, Yujung-gwan Na. I'm in tears over Yu-jung's death, and yet I envy the man. I became aware of his works first at the offices of Genesis, it's Kebyak, where I was seeing to some business or other. It was later that I met him face to face at An Hui Nam's place where I'd gone to shoot the breeze, and it's the face I remember. In comes this young man who looks a bit naive, and his clothing wasn't doing him any favors, and he was already cracking a hard joke for An's benefit. But when he saw me, his face turned sullen, and he looked put out, which I chalked up to it as a territorial thing. And that was Yu-jung. The truth was, and I found this out a bit later from An, that Yu-jung knew who I was, but he was a bit tipsy as he trudged in, and he thought An was the only one home. So when he noticed me, he got embarrassed, and he tried to hide it, which gave me, your abnormal neurasthenic narrator, the impression he was a sourpuss. And sure enough, once we'd had the chance to properly introduce ourselves, and I'd seen him once and then met him again, I felt the flush of recognition that if ever there was a man who didn't need the law to tell him how to live, it was Yu-jung, a true gentleman. He displayed courtesy, but not the showy variety. He was warm-hearted, with an emphasis on heart, and there wasn't an iota of snootiness to the man. He was a true Tolstoy. And I should mention that Tolstoy is a character in Worthless, one of his last stories. That's Chaemanchik talk. I didn't respect his works, I loved them, and more the joy of doing so. But I loved Yu-jung the person even more, or perhaps I should say I wanted to love him, but couldn't because I was not as sincere a man as he. He'd taken ill while I was still in Seoul, but it was only after I moved that I looked him up. I told him how sorry I was for being a heartless bastard. Then I followed up with a letter offering some concrete suggestions about benefiting from treatment and saving on the costs, And he wrote right back saying for sure he'd give it a shot and promising he'd do his damnedest to beat the disease. Yujung died a miserable death. What a waste. If only I could trade in a dozen hacks like me and bring him back. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would like at this point invite 박민규 to come up. 여기 앉아요. And I guess I'll have to translate for him, but I don't know if you actually have a microphone that may work. Question and answer. We've gone a little over time, but hopefully we can tell them. And we do have a reception after. So, if you have questions, comments, please just wave your hand and we'll have a microphone out to you. Oh, yes. Sure.
Thank you for.
And if you speak both Korean and English, I would extremely appreciate if you can also translate your own question.
저는 한국에서 온 지 2년이 좀 넘었고요. 사실 개인적으로 작가님을 좋아해서 책을 가지고 왔어요. 이민 올 때. 그래서 오늘 사인을 받으려고 책을 가지고 왔는데 다행히 이 책을 읽어주셔서 일단 되게 감사하게 생각을 하고요. 이 책을 제가 튜터링 받는 분하고 얘기를 한 적이 있어요. 이 책이 너무 신기해서 내용이. 그때 이 책이 되게 다양한 동물들이 등장을 하는데 특히 여기서 보면 기린입니까? 이것도 지하철 얘기가 계속 나오다가 근데 기린이 마지막에 등장을 하는데 이런 동물이 그 친구의 질문이 이 동물이 굉장히 한국적인 거냐라는 질문을 저한테 했었거든요. 그래서 그 질문을 여기서 답을 해주시면 이제 제가 돌아가서 그 친구에게 여기서 나오는 동물들이 이제 어떤 의미가 있는지. 네. Okay, let me try. Yeah, if you want to someone can help me because I'm not that good at English, but okay, I can try. So I'm from Korea 2 years ago, and then I brought this one of his books because I love it, and then that is these short stories. If looking at the book, actually we can see a lot of different kind of animals. So one of my friends asked me, she is the American, but sometimes I talked with her of what I read because her hobby is also to read the book. So even though she is very good reader. So she finds some translating what did it say? Some his short stories in English on the internet googling. So what she told me, what she had the question is that. Is there any specific reason to bring a giraffe in his story? Because reading at the book, actually there are lots of stories happening in subway in Korea, but all of a sudden the giraffe came up, and then she can't understand what happened, and then what she asked me what that animal means, but I don't understand as well. So if I have a chance like this, it is very honored to ask him by myself here to what the meaning of that animal in your short stories.
네, 감사합니다. 우선 한국에는 기린이 살지 않아요. 네. 그리고
So there's no giraffes in Korea.
동물원에는 있습니다. 네.
There are some in the zoo.
그 소설은 그 미국에도 그 러시아어가 있나요? 지하철?
Russia, yeah. Is there a rush hour in America? Yes. Of course. Traffic congestion.
한국은 이제 그 굉장히 많은 사람들이 그 출퇴근 시간에 지하철을 타야 되기 때문에 전철이 사람이 더 많이 타기 위해서 이렇게 밀어넣는 직업이 있었습니다.
So there was a profession actually. There still is, I believe, in Korea, because there's so many people who actually have to get on the subway during the rush hour. They're called. He didn't say it yet, but pushman.
예, 영어로 푸시맨이라고
There's actually
불렀어요.
somebody hired to load more people on the subway.
그러니까 전철이
Trains.
꽉 차 있으면 근데 이 사람은 출근을 해야 돼요. 그러면은 푸시맨이 이 사람을 꽉 차 있는 전철 안으로 막 집어넣는 겁니다.
The train is already congested and overpopulated, but the person has to go get to work. So the pushman would actually be responsible for literally pushing, right, another passenger onto the already populated train.
그 푸시맨의 이야기예요. 이 소설은. 예, 그래서 이제
That story about giraffe is about pushman.
그래서 질문하신 것은 이제 아버지가 맨 마지막에 왜 기린으로 등장하느냐 그러고
So
왜
your
기린이냐는 것인데
yeah, so your question is why does the father appear as a giraffe at the end of the story?
저는 그 당시에 이제 생각했습니다. 그 자본주의가 가장 처치 곤란한 동물이 무엇일까?
At the time, I actually thought to myself, if there was one animal that is very, very difficult to get rid of by capitalism, what would that be?
그리고 그 지하철에 가장 밀어넣기 힘든 동물이 어떤 동물일까?
And what would an animal be almost impossible to the most impossible, right, to fit into a subway train?
그래서 그 기린의 의미에는 그 아버지가 이제 어쩔래라는 그런 의문이 담겨 있다고 표현이 담겨 있다고 보시면
So the appearance of the father at the end is a kind of rhetorical question. What the hell are you going to do about this? Right?
태우든지 말든지 뭐
You're going to beat me up or what? Is the kind of right, question at the end that lingers at the end.
답변이 됐으면 감사하겠습니다.
I hope that answers your question.
Nobody? Then I will do it.
선생님의 스타일은요. 선생님 스타일은 글 쓰시는 거 굉장히 독특합니다. 그러니까 이 대화책 그게 많은 작가들이 어느새 갑자기 그 코테이션을 안 쓰기 시작했잖아요. His style, writing style is very unique in a way because suddenly we notice that so many Korean writers they don't use quotations. It's because they're lazy, or they want to include so many different, the dialogue. I'm not sure, but 선생님 스타일은 그다음에 여기 그 활자 있죠. 활자 크기도 갑자기 줄어들어요. 갑자기 여자 것도 있고 난 이게 여자라서 이렇게 얌전하게 작게 쓰는가 했는데 또 남자 것도 갑자기 작게 쓴다고요? 예를 들어서 근처 그런 거에 대해서 조금 알고 싶습니다. So one example is that the story is 황순원 문학상 story called 근처. I don't know how to translate the title, but there suddenly the typeset changes to very, very small. So we're wondering that, is it because it's female talking? But then later I noticed that also male talking, suddenly the font size becomes very tiny, like 12 to 5 or 7. And so that's my, 제가 궁금한 게 선생님의 그렇게 자유롭게 쓰시는 게 미국에서는 참 드물거든요. 드문데 그렇게 하실 수 있는 게 그 에디터들이 괜찮습니다. 그러나요?
So editor's okay with that kind of experimental use of typeset.
우선 저는 진짜 말 안 듣는 인간이에요. 어릴 때부터 그랬습니다.
I am a kind of a human being that makes no sense. I was like that when I was young.
그리고 저는 그러니까 소설, 그 산문이란 거를 배운 적이 없어요.
So I had no experience really learning how to write.
그 대학 때, 그러니까 저는 소설은 전혀 수업을 못 받고 시를 전공했습니다.
It wasn't actually novel writing that I took classes on. I majored in poetry when I was in school.
그러면 이제 소설을 배워서 써야 될 텐데 절대 남에게 물어보지 않는 성격이에요.
So then I should have actually learned how to write novels or fiction, but I have a personality that would hesitate to ask any kind of question to just about anyone.
그래서 산문도 이렇게 연을 띄워서 쓰는 줄 알았습니다.
So even prose writing, I thought you actually had to put it line by line as you do in poetry.
그리고 글씨 작은 글씨도 막 쓰고 많이 쓰기도 하고 그러니까 똑같은 글이지만 내 마음에서 이거는 조금 작게 말하거나 몰래 말하거나 뭐 그런 거는 작은 글씨로 쓰기도 하고 그랬습니다.
So when when I was thinking about how to write small, I said to myself, "Oh, this got to be small because maybe I have to hush, or maybe this ought to be spoken in discreet way. So maybe the font size needs to be smaller, or I have to write it in small."
그리고 뭐 문학상 뭐 수상작 말씀하셨는데
You talked about winning a literary award.
그 어릴 때부터 뭐 그런 심사위원이나 이런 그런 나이 드신 분들을 좋아하지 않았어요.
Even when I was little or when I was young, I never liked the people on the juries or people who were actually older who would be the ones evaluating these works.
그래서
at the literary award.
그래서 특히 그런 작품에는 작은 글씨를 많이 써가지고
So that's the reason because when I had to submit for these literary awards, I would actually purposely make the font small and small.
고생 잔뜩 하세요. 그런 마음이었어요.
To hell with you, trying to read these small font was the kind of attitude.
그런 겁니다.
Yeah. So that's what it is. Okay. I want to thank because again it's Park Min-gyu's world, literary world, as well as Chaemansik's world. I feel as it only makes sense when it's more of a kind of an open air, open environment, not so stifling. When people are able to freely come in and out, especially with drinks in their hands. Scotchalism is what I call this particular ideology, as you pointed out in your idiot uncle, innocent uncle. So I'd like to close the official, panel and question and answer session, but we are able to stick around and enjoy this wonderful library for the next hour or so. So please stick around, get yourself a drink, and feel free to approach any one of us with your questions or comments or feedbacks. Thanks so much for coming, and thank you for Shala again and Lorelei
Yes.
for hosting this wonderful event.
Okay. Before we adjourn, I just want to mention 3 things very quickly. Our plan is to have book sales and signings, and definitely Bruce and Juchan will be able to sign their book. The publisher for Pak Mingyu was not able to supply the book, but he is graciously willing to sign this wonderful translation. So we're so pleased about that. We hope you'll take a visit to the Korea Corner, 1 floor below. And of course, please do enjoy the refreshments. So let's give them all a big round of applause to all our speakers. Thank you.